Let's see, I've been dancing for 10 years and I mostly lead. I started following maybe 3 years ago, starting to work on that more.
And why do you dance and why did you start dancing?
Hmm. Well, those are two different answers.
Yes.
um, so I started dancing. Well, actually, very originally I started dancing. It was in eighth grade, and there was this girl that I really wanted to impress at the school dance. So I went out and I took some lessons in West Coast swing and night club two step and waltz and all this stuff. And I was like all prepped and ready to go. And we got to the dance and they played hip hop and rap music the whole time. I was like, oh shit, I didn't I didn't plan on that one. And it wasn't until like after that things kind of fell off for a while. And it wasn't until my senior year that I went back out with a group of friends. And what really made me fall in love with it was well, there were a few things. There was like the music, which was swing, and I had loved jazz music for a really long time, so this was right up my alley. Um, there was the energy, just the physical activity of moving around and being bouncy and happy, and like you just get excited about everything. And then um, there was definitely also a social element of it that I was getting to connect with other people, and that was really fun and exciting. Um, it was good to get to meet new people and get to hang out with old friends. Nowadays, I'd say that what really keeps me going out dancing are the people, probably. Um, well, that and like teaching it keeps me coming out, but like when I'm just being a dancer, I'm coming out mostly for the people, and then a little bit for the like excitement of expressing something new and that sort of thing.
Now, how would you describe blues dancing?
Blues dancing as it is now is sort of a composite of two different pieces. Blues originally was, danced by African Americans back in the early 1900s. And it was danced to blues music, and it had very strong African roots. It had a lot of vernacular movement in it, um, and is as blues is today. There's a lot of effort put into studying those old movements and understanding how people moved their body, understanding the culture behind it, so that we can emulate those movements. Um, but as is completely natural with any dance, when you insert it into a new culture, it gets changed because people move their bodies differently. So there's this second part to blues as it is now, which is the how do we move as predominantly white, middle to upper middle class people. I'm giving these broad generalizations here, but I'd say that that kind of captures the majority of people in blues. And how do they move, and what makes them feel like they're truly expressing themselves? Uh, so blues is this interesting composite of both trying to understand the way people used to move and really emulating that, and also making that our own and making it informing our own movement and our own styling and aesthetic.
Now, has blues dancing changed since you first began dancing?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah.
I started in 2004,
Mm-hmm.
and at that point, Lindy and blues were still very much similar. They were, I wouldn't say similar, but they were still very linked. So pretty much everybody who danced blues also danced Lindy Hop. So there was a lot of swingy movement. A lot of the music that got played at blues dances were jazzier. There was, you could call it slow Lindy or groovy Lindy sometimes. And uh, and since then, I'd say that blues has matured more. It's become more of its own distinct and unique dance style. So it has its own subset of music that it plays, and there's a lot more emphasis on the vernacular movement and a lot less emphasis on things like stretch and momentum, and there's more talk about grounding and rhythm and Yeah.
And where do you dance, and how do your experiences with blues dancing vary from one space to another?
Do you mean geographically, or like what kinds of spaces do I use for dancing?
Both.
Okay. Well, geographically, I dance all over the world because I teach all over the world. Um, as far as geographic variability goes, I'd say Europe is sort of where the United States was. In some regards, it's where the United States was maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And in other regards, it's just become its own unique thing. Like people just have a slightly different style of movement. There's a different set of values within the blues community in Europe as opposed to in the United States. Um,
What kind of values?
I'd say there's a heavier social element to European dancers. And the reason that I say that is I'm thinking of all of the dance events that occur in bars, because a lot of like especially United Kingdom's a great example of this. So a lot of their venues are on the upper floor of a bar where they actually have a nice wood or a decent wood floor, and they move all the chairs and tables aside, and then they rent out the space and they dance, and that's really fun and good. But they also have a bar downstairs, and there's a pretty strong drinking culture there. So people will come out, they'll have one or two drinks, and they'll just hang out and chat a lot. And there's like still an emphasis on, hey, let's dance, but there's also a stronger element on let's actually sit down and talk with each other and kind of hang out. And you don't always see that as often in dance venues in the United States, where there's chairs along the side, the perimeter of the venue, but it's not really fun to sit there for very long, and they're not very good social spaces. They're kind of there as a holding ground for people who are not dancing.
Okay.
Yeah, so that I would say that that's like one of the values. I think the other ones are a little bit harder to put my finger on, just because I'm not like fully embedded in those communities, so it'd be hard for me to say without misrepresenting it.
Right. Now, how does dancing with different partners impact your experience?
It has a pretty big impact. As a lead, I tend to only be able to lead the movements that are actually accessible to my follow. And that's not a deliberate like, oh, I'm dancing with a beginner, so I'm going to, dumb down my movement. Instead, it's a feeling. Like I feel what's possible in their body based upon their parasitic tension and upon where their balance is and all these different things. And that opens or closes certain opportunities for movement. And then, I just explore what's within the range of clear possibility. I'm very, very bad at picking moves and being like, all right, we're going to do this. And I'm just going to sort of force you through it. Yeah, so I'd say that dancing with different people can have a tremendous impact on the way that I dance and what I dance. And further, like, I find that every follow has a different style. Every follow has a different way of expressing themselves and what really clicks with them. So with some people, I'll include a lot of rhythmic variations and poly play and like, messing around with African style movement, because that clicks with them and they can really dig into that and have fun with it. With other people, I go for more of like a ballroomy, smooth and graceful style of movement, because that's what seems to click. So it's also heavily influenced by what they like.
Yes. In your opinion, do men and women experience dancing differently?
To be honest, that one I can't really speak about intelligently. I know the way that I experience dance, and I can talk about the way that I see women like move and how they lead when they lead. But I haven't really inquired much about what is their experience of dance versus men's experience.
Sure. Now, how would you describe the lead-follow dynamic?
Well, there's to me, there's like a couple of different ranges. the traditional range of the lead-follow dynamic would be the lead choreographs the entire dance, and the follow just makes it look pretty. But that's kind of boring to me, because I get tired of my crap, and I want it to be a conversation. So there's like this continuum of like absolute control and choreography versus having like a conversation between two people, and in that, to me, the lead is more like they're providing this space, a bubble in which the follow can work and play and experiment. And that bubble can move around, it can change shape, it can change orientation. And the follow generally operates within that bubble. And if the follow happens to break outside of the bubble, then that gets into some less clear range of probably that might not have been following. And the strength of the bounds on that bubble can be variable as well, depending on how strong the lead's frame is. So, if the bubble is held very taut and immovable, then the follow can more easily break out of it if they push up against the wall. But for a lot of leads, they have more of a malleable, flexible boundary, so if a follow pushes up against the wall of that bubble, then they just move the bubble, and they sort of move in response to what the follow is doing.
Now, is that specific to blues dancing, or is that across dance styles?
I see it more in blues. But I definitely see it more in blues. I think part of it is the value that we have placed as a community upon improvisation, upon partnering, and even upon egalitarianism. Also, I think it lends itself to blues partly because the music is a bit slower. There's less choreographed movement. There's less patterned movement. So there's a lot more room, both in time and in terms of like prescribed movements that allow people to be a little bit more playful and experimental.
Now, how would you describe masculinity and femininity?
I would describe them as energies. Any person can have masculine or feminine energy. To me, masculine energy is directive, decisive, goal-oriented, and there's probably a few others, but those are the big pieces. And for femininity, I would say it's open-ended. I'm not quite sure what the opposite of goal-oriented would be. It's about enjoying the process, enjoying the journey. And it's... I was going to say it's gentler, but that's not necessarily true, because you can have very strong, like, fiery feminine movement as well. So that's not even a thing. Yeah.
Now, how about masculine and feminine movement? What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, I think for masculine movement, I see a lot of like definitive movement, so that you get to a point and then you stop. Like you hit a pose and then you hold the pose. You move with a greater level of certainty, and you're not sort of wasting time getting from point A to point B in a meandering fashion. You're just, bam, I'm going to be there. In more concrete terms, I'd say things like, the hands don't typically go above the shoulders, usually. There tends to be being in the front of your space, so there's a little bit more aggression involved at times. And even when a person with masculine movement is in the back of their space, there's still a certain confidence and self-assuredness and challenging involved. You're saying, well, I'm going to be in the back of my space, and I'm inviting you to just show me what you've got, because I'm sure it's not as good as my stuff. For feminine movement, I'd say that smoother lines. There's more of a feeling the movement out and really enjoying that process. And once you get to the end point of something, you're still sort of exploring that end point in space. Hands tend to go above the shoulders. You see smoother, slower movement. I'd say, well, this one I think is actually culturally based. I was going to say that there's more isolations and undulatory movement in feminine movement, but that's actually not quite true, or it doesn't hold true for all cultures. Like in the Congo, for example, men do all sorts of pelvic undulations. And when I got there and I was watching, I was like, wow, that looks rather feminine. But then I realized that that was just my own cultural upbringing, that masculine movement is not about that for us, masculine movement is about keeping your pelvis under lock and key, not moving your shoulders much. Everything's kind of stocky. And in the Congo, it's quite the reverse of that. That the paragon of masculine movement is somebody who can be hypersexual and really powerful, but also very flexible and mobile.
So do you teach any classes on gendered movement or on masculine and feminine movement? Or have you?
I have. It's not common that I teach it, just because it's not something that I've been so riled up about and passionate about that I was like, I have to teach this. Because there's just so much stuff to teach, right? Mm-hmm. But that said, I have taught classes before on that, and I've really enjoyed it for sure. And I think it's really valuable to explore both sides.
Do you feel there are any pros or cons to teaching movement as masculine or feminine?
Well, for the pros, I would say that a lot of people don't have the time, don't have the perception, what have you, to really be able to identify what makes something look masculine or feminine. And so they're moving through space and they don't even really know what kinds of movement they're portraying culturally. So there's something to be said for someone else saying, hey, this is the way you can make yourself look masculine or make yourself look feminine. On the flip side of that, it does mean that there is somebody from on high saying this is what masculine and feminine movement is. And as I mentioned about, like the Congo culture, that may not be representative of the way it is for everybody. And people can experience masculinity and femininity different from the way that you're doing it. So certainly when I teach it, I try to make sure that it's a process of like trying it on like you would try on a coat. If it fits for you, great, keep it on. If it doesn't, take it off at the end of the day. I think overall, though, it is beneficial to identify and understand what, regardless of how you define it, to be able to provide more clarity between the two energies. It's very easy to become blurred, and I think especially in our society today, there's a trend toward androgyny, particularly among male-bodied individuals. There's just a general push away from being masculine of any sort because it's considered to be dangerous or threatening or violent. And there's like a general fear of really exploring what it is to be in both ends of these extremes. And I think that there's a real value in that, in really understanding how to engage with something that is very, very basic to us as humans.
Now, do you feel you embody any feminine or masculine characteristics when you dance?
Yeah, I'd say that I actually do a mixture. I'm pretty bad at being only masculine in my movement. I tend to be directive and goal-oriented, and well, that's not very true. I tend to have an overall view of like maybe where we're going to be going. And I think lately the big masculine piece that I've been exploring is being a strong foundation for the movement of my follow. So I'll be a strong base if they want to do any flying, or if they want to do any aerials, or if they want to work off of my body. I'm providing more of a stable base that's less moving and fluid. But that said, like when I move, I tend to be very fluid. I love moving fluidly, and I'd say that that is, in my mind, more of a feminine quality.
Does your movement change when you follow?
Yeah, definitely bring out the smooth side more. And I become far less about providing the shape of the dance and more about letting the shape happen and just going with the flow entirely and just waiting for things to occur. And again, I think that that's one of those ways in which leading and following lend itself to masculine and feminine movement. I mean, to be clear, like you can be feminine as a leader and masculine as a follower, even though the traditional historical norm was that men were leads and women were follows. But I think that they lend themselves to those roles very nicely because as a lead, you need to provide the shape of the dance, and as such you're a bit directive, you're a bit goal oriented, and as a follow you're really waiting for everything to occur, and you're just going with the flow and experiencing things. It's all very experiential, it's very sensual, sensorial. So I think that it's kind of natural that people would adopt more of a masculine movement for leading and more of a feminine quality for following.
Now, in what ways do you express your gender identity while dancing? Do your movements, clothing choices, and/or character reflect your gender?
It's something I've been playing around with a bit more. I'd say on the range of on the scale of gender bending, I'm pretty low on the bar, but compared to other people in the community who are really like into exploring what it means to what gender identity means and what gender bending is, and but yeah, I definitely play around with it. I mean, I default to what my gender expression is, which is male. And so I tend to wear male-ish clothing, standard slacks, a button-down shirt, that sort of thing. But I do play around sometimes with, like, owning a pair of pants that are definitely female pants. They're colorful, they're flowery, and that sort of adds this, like, well, not just a one-dimensional kind of person.
Now, do you ever accentuate femininity or masculinity for competition or performance? Maybe thinking about a particular example, if you have one.
Yeah, I would definitely say that I draw it out more, or I try to draw it out more when I'm doing competition. And I think part of it is that it's about depicting a stronger image. It's about creating a certain aesthetic and making that aesthetic super clear.
What do you think about dancers accentuating femininity or masculinity for competition or performance?
I think it's fine. I mean, like, I'm entirely in favor of of drawing it out because it's all about exploration, right?
Yeah. Do you believe that age could be a factor in how a person would express their gender on the dance floor?
Yes, and the reason I think so is that our gender expression has changed generationally. So the men of 50 years ago had very different mannerisms and expressions than the men of today. And I would say the same for women. Additionally, especially in this generation and perhaps a little bit younger, there's more of a exploration of like the experimental, really questioning, am I cisgendered? Am I, like, if I'm male bodied, am I also masculine? Am I also identify as a male? Do I express as a male? Am I attracted to females? And I think that there's more willingness in the younger generations to explore that than in the older generations. So in that way as well, there is a change in how gender is expressed by age.
Now, do you have any final thoughts on anything we talked about or didn't talk about regarding gender and dance or anything really?
I think it's really wonderful, this study that you're doing, because it's really drawing out a very interesting and current topic in our community. Like, there's a lot of exploration that's going into gender identity right now. The recess community is just really, really big on it. But I think at the same time, as it's important to explore what gendered identity means, and to be really open and accepting and providing a safe space for people to explore that, I think there's real value as well in understanding what the predominant expression is and what has it been historically. And that's not to say that the new expression is wrong or anything like that, but it's also interesting to know what it means when people are in a sort of like default, historically consistent kind of expression of men being masculine and women being feminine. And what does that mean and what does it look like? And I think it's a conversation that can be easily, it's a conversation that can be easily misconstrued as talking about, as saying that women should be feminine and it should look like this, or men should be masculine and it should look like this. And I don't really buy into that. But I do believe that, I'd say for the majority of men, masculinity is the dominant energy, and for the majority of women, femininity is the dominant energy, and it's valuable to understand what that can be.